My wife sued me for $7 million. A lawyer came and told me about it, but it wasn't possible. The lawyer started panicking when I said, "My wife died 2 years ago. My name is Marcus Bell, and I'm 34 years old, though some days I feel like I've lived twice that long." For 8 incredible years, I was married to a woman named Tessa, a force of nature wrapped up in a 5'6" frame with auburn hair that caught the light just right when she was concentrating on her laptop screen. She had this sharp mind that could cut through any problem like a hot knife through butter, and a warm heart that made our cramped home office feel like the coziest place on earth. We weren't your typical married couple, I guess. Most people go to separate jobs, come home tired, and try to squeeze in quality time between dinner and Netflix. But Tessa and I, we ran several digital content platforms together, spending our days writing, editing, brainstorming, and building something we genuinely loved from the ground up. Our dining room table doubled as a conference room. Our kitchen was where we took our water cooler breaks, and our bedroom was the only space in the house that wasn't cluttered with sticky notes, coffee cups, and charging cables. People used to ask us all the time, "How do you spend so much time together without getting on each other's nerves?" They'd say it with this look in their eyes like we were some kind of circus act, the couple who actually enjoyed working together. But here's the thing they didn't understand. Tessa wasn't just my wife. She was my business partner, sure, but she was also my best friend, my sounding board, my anchor in whatever storm life decided to throw our way. Our typical day started around 7 in the morning with coffee that was way too strong and toast that was usually slightly burnt because one of us got distracted by an email notification. We'd sit at our matching desks, hers always organized, mine looking like a tornado had blown through, and dive into our work. She handled the technical side of things, the algorithms and analytics that made my head spin, while I focused on the creative content and client relationships. We'd bounce ideas off each other throughout the day, taking breaks to share meals between video conferences and client calls. The best part wasn't even the work, though. It was the random conversations that would spring up out of nowhere. One minute we'd be discussing conversion rates and SEO strategies, and the next we'd be debating whether almond cake was better than chocolate cake, or arguing about which streaming service had the best true crime documentaries. Tessa had strong opinions about everything, from the proper way to load a dishwasher to why pineapple absolutely belonged on pizza, and I loved hearing every single one of them. Our home office was this beautiful chaos of creativity and ambition. We had 2 monitors each, a shared printer that jammed more often than it worked, and a whiteboard covered in colorful markers where we'd map out content calendars and business strategies. The walls were covered with printouts of our best articles, client testimonials, and random inspirational quotes that Tessa would find online and insist on hanging up. My favorite was one that said, "The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now." She'd point to it whenever I started doubting whether we were making the right moves with our business. We thought we had forever, not in some naive, fairy tale way, but in that comfortable, settled way that married couples fall into when they've found their rhythm. We'd talk about expanding the business, maybe hiring a couple of freelancers, eventually moving to a bigger place with a proper office space, and maybe even a backyard where we could set up one of those fancy outdoor workstations. Tessa had already started researching the best laptops for working outside, because she was always thinking 3 steps ahead like that. Money wasn't exactly flowing like water, but we were making it work. Some months were better than others, feast or famine, as they say in the freelance world, but we'd learned to roll with the ups and downs. We had this system where we'd celebrate the good months with takeout from our favorite Thai place and movie nights on the couch. And during the lean months, we'd get creative with pasta dinners and free entertainment like hiking trails or checking out local art galleries during their free admission days. What I remember most about those 8 years wasn't the stress of deadlines or the excitement of landing new clients. It was the little moments that filled up the spaces in between. The way Tessa would unconsciously hum while she worked, usually some pop song she'd heard on the radio that morning. How she'd steal sips of my coffee, even though she had her own cup sitting right there. The satisfied sigh she'd make when she finally solved a particularly tricky coding problem, followed by her calling out, "Marcus, come look at this," because she was genuinely excited to share her victories with me. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our comfortable silences. We knew each other's work habits, mood swings, and pet peeves. I knew that Tessa got cranky if she didn't eat lunch by 1 o'clock, and she knew that I needed at least 2 cups of coffee before I could handle any serious conversations in the morning. We were a team in the truest sense of the word, both in business and in life. Looking back now, I can see how lucky we were to have found that balance. Most people spend their whole lives trying to figure out what they want to do for work, who they want to spend their time with, where they want to build their life. We'd figured out all three and wrapped them up into one beautiful, messy, caffeinated package. But life has this way of reminding you that nothing lasts forever, no matter how perfect it seems in the moment. It's funny how the most life-changing moments can start with something so ordinary. In our case, it was Dave from down the street. You know, the guy who always waves from his front yard while walking his overly enthusiastic golden retriever. Dave worked in insurance, and he was always going on about preventive care and how everyone should get regular checkups. Most of the time, we'd just nod politely and change the subject. But that particular Tuesday morning, he caught us both coming back from our coffee run to the corner cafe. "You two work too hard," he said, scratching behind his dog's ears while the animal practically vibrated with excitement at seeing us. "When's the last time either of you saw a doctor? And I mean really saw one, not just for a cold or something." Tessa rolled her eyes good-naturedly, balancing our 2 large coffees while trying to fish her keys out of her jacket pocket. "Dave, we're fine. We eat our vegetables, we take our vitamins, we get plenty of exercise walking to the coffee shop every morning." She was being sarcastic, of course, but Dave wasn't having it. "Look, my company's running this promotion where they'll cover full-body checkups, comprehensive blood work, the whole 9 yards. It's like getting a complete tune-up for your body. What VE you got to lose?" He handed me a business card that was slightly crumpled from being in his wallet. "Just think about it, okay? Prevention is worth a pound of cure, or however that saying goes." Tessa wasn't having it at first. She'd always been one of those people who prided herself on never getting sick, never needing to see doctors except for the occasional routine stuff. "I'm healthy as a horse," she'd say whenever the topic came up, usually while doing something that proved her point, like carrying all our groceries up 3 flights of stairs in one trip, or staying up until 2 in the morning to meet a client deadline without even yawning the next day. She had this boundless energy that made me feel lazy sometimes, even though I kept up with her pretty well. But Dave was persistent in that friendly, neighbor-wise way that's hard to argue with. He'd bring it up every time we saw him, always casual, but always there. "Get those checkups yet?" he'd ask while collecting his mail. "Remember what I said about that promotion?" he'd mention while we were all taking our trash to the curb on Thursday mornings. Finally, after about 2 weeks of this gentle pressure, Tessa threw up her hands in defeat. "Fine," she said one evening while we were eating dinner and watching some cooking show on Netflix. "Let's just do it and get Dave off our backs. How bad could it be, right? We go in, they tell us we're perfectly fine, and then we can say we did it." She was already pulling out her phone to look up the clinic Dave had recommended. "Besides, we can probably write it off as a business expense. Gotta stay healthy to keep the business running." The appointment process was surprisingly easy. The clinic had online scheduling, and they could fit us both in on the same day, which was perfect since we hated spending time apart if we didn't have to. They sent us a bunch of forms to fill out ahead of time. Family medical history, current medications, lifestyle questions that made us realize just how much coffee we actually drank in a day. Tessa made jokes about the whole thing, calling it our medical adventure and wondering if they'd give us matching hospital gowns. The day of our appointments, we drove to the clinic together, listening to our usual morning playlist and stopping for coffee on the way because some habits die hard. The building was one of those modern medical complexes with lots of glass and steel, the kind of place that tries to look less intimidating than traditional hospitals, but somehow ends up feeling more sterile. The waiting room had those uncomfortable chairs that are probably designed to discourage people from lingering, and magazines that were at least 6 months out of date. My appointment went first, and it was exactly what I expected. Routine questions, basic measurements, blood pressure that was slightly higher than ideal, but nothing to worry about. Blood drawn for various tests that I didn't really understand, but nodded along with anyway. The doctor was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who told me to keep exercising, maybe cut back on the caffeine a little, and consider adding more vegetables to my diet. Standard stuff that I'd heard before and would probably ignore again. Tessa's appointment was right after mine, and I waited in the lobby, scrolling through my phone and answering emails. She was in there longer than I expected, but I figured they were just being thorough. When she finally came out, she looked a little tired but was smiling and making jokes with the nurse about how many vials of blood they'd taken. "They're going to have to give me a juice box and a cookie after all that," she said, linking her arm through mine as we walked to the car. We spent the next few days pretty much forgetting about the whole thing. We had work to focus on, deadlines to meet, clients to keep happy. The clinic said results would be ready in about a week, and we figured no news was good news. Tessa was back to her usual self, staying up late, bouncing around the house with endless energy, making plans for expanding our business into video content. Then the call came on a Thursday afternoon while we were both deep in work mode. Tessa answered without looking at the caller ID, expecting it to be a client or maybe her mom checking in. But I could tell from the change in her voice that it wasn't a casual call. Her usual bright greeting shifted to something more serious, more cautious. She grabbed a pen and started writing down notes, asking questions I couldn't quite hear from across the room. When she hung up, she just sat there for a moment, staring at the piece of paper in her hand. "That was Dr. Martinez," she said, her voice steady but different somehow. "She wants us to come in tomorrow to discuss my results. Both of us." The way she emphasized both of us made my stomach drop. Good results don't require your spouse to be there. The meeting with Dr. Martinez was everything I hoped it wouldn't be. We sat in those uncomfortable plastic chairs across from her desk while she delivered the news that would split our lives into before and after. Stage for cancer. The words hit like a freight train, but Tessa, God, she was incredible. She actually tried to lighten the mood. "Well, Doc," she said with this shaky smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "I guess I better finish that article series I've been putting off. Can't leave my readers hanging, right?" But I saw past the brave face. I saw the fear flickering behind her eyes like a candle in the wind. The next week was a blur of hospital admissions, insurance paperwork, and medical terms I couldn't pronounce but had to learn fast. Tessa got moved into a room on the 4th floor with mint green walls and a window that looked out onto the parking lot. Not exactly the view you'd want while fighting for your life, but she made the best of it. She insisted on bringing her laptop, said she could still edit articles from bed, maybe even write a blog about the experience. "People love authentic content," she joked, though her fingers shook slightly as she typed. That's when I made what I thought was a practical decision, but was probably the beginning of my own downward spiral. I figured I needed to stay busy, needed to keep money coming in while Tessa focused on getting better. Our savings were decent, but medical bills have a way of eating through your nest egg like termites through wood. So I took on a night job at Peterson's Grocery, the little family-owned place about 6 blocks from our house. It seemed perfect at first. I could work our digital platforms during the day, visit Tessa in the evening, then stock shelves and organize inventory from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Sleep was optional, right? I'd catch maybe 4 hours between getting home and starting the cycle all over again. Coffee became less of a pleasure and more of a medical necessity. I was downing energy drinks like they were water, living off protein bars, and whatever free samples the grocery store was pushing that week. The routine was brutal, but it kept my mind occupied. During the day, I'd throw myself into our work with an intensity that probably worried our clients. I'd respond to emails within minutes, deliver projects ahead of schedule, take on extra assignments that we normally would have passed on. When evening came, I'd drive to the hospital and sit beside Tessa's bed, holding her hand while she dozed or trying to make her laugh with stories about the weird customers I'd encountered at the store. "This guy came in at 2 in the morning looking for organic kale," I'd tell her, and when I said we were out, he asked if I could call other stores to check their inventory. "At 2 a.m., Tess, who needs kale that badly at 2 in the morning?" She'd smile, sometimes even laugh, but I could see how much effort it took. The treatments were wearing her down, stealing pieces of the vibrant woman I'd married and replacing them with someone frilier, more fragile. I kept telling her we'd get through it. "This is just a rough patch," I'd whisper while she slept, her hand still in mine. "You're going to beat this thing, and then we'll have the best comeback story ever. Maybe we'll write a book about it, do some speaking engagements." People love survival stories, right? I said it so many times I almost started believing it myself. But my body had other plans. About 3 weeks into this insane schedule, I was walking out of Peterson's after another long shift, my vision a little blurry from exhaustion and too much caffeine. The morning sun felt unusually bright, and I remember thinking I should probably eat something more substantial than a granola bar. That's the last clear memory I have before waking up on the sidewalk with a concerned face hovering over me. The man was older, maybe in his 60s, with silver hair that was perfectly combed despite the early hour and a heavy winter coat that looked expensive but lived in. His eyes were kind but sharp, the kind of eyes that didn't miss much. "You okay, son?" he asked, his voice carrying just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. "You took a pretty good tumble there. Hit the pavement like a sack of potatoes." I tried to sit up, embarrassed and disoriented. "I'm fine," I mumbled, which was obviously a lie since I was sprawled on the sidewalk at 6:30 in the morning. "Just tripped, I think. Probably stepped on something." But he wasn't buying it, and honestly, neither was I. My hands were shaking, my head felt like it was stuffed with cotton, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten a real meal. "When's the last time you slept?" he asked, helping me to my feet with surprising strength for his age. And I mean really slept, not that power nap nonsense. "You look like you haven't seen a pillow in weeks." He introduced himself as Jerome, said he lived just a couple blocks away, and was out for his morning walk when he saw me go down. "My wife Camilla's a retired nurse," he continued, brushing off my jacket with the efficiency of someone who'd dealt with stubborn people before. "She'd have my hide if I let you wander off in this condition." I started to protest. I had things to do, places to be, a wife in the hospital who needed me to stay strong. But Jerome had this quiet authority that made arguing seem pointless. "Son," he said, putting a gentle but firm hand on my shoulder, "whatever you're running from or running toward, it'll still be there after you get some rest. But you won't be any good to anyone if you collapse again, and next time you might not be so lucky." Looking back, that moment on the sidewalk was probably when my life started to change again, though I didn't know it yet. Jerome would become one of the most important people in my world, but right then he was just a stranger who cared enough to stop and help when I couldn't help myself. Jerome's house was nothing like what I expected from our brief sidewalk encounter. It was one of those classic brick colonials that you see in old neighborhoods, with a wraparound porch and flower boxes that clearly got more attention than my own neglected yard ever did. The inside was warm and lived in, with family photos covering every available surface and the kind of furniture that was built to last generations, not just until the next furniture store sale. That's where I first met Camilla, and let me tell you, she was a force of nature wrapped up in a 5'2" package. She had silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck, and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that probably made her a hell of a nurse back in the day. When Jerome walked me through their front door, explaining how he'd found me passed out on the sidewalk, she took one look at me and immediately went into what I can only describe as mom mode. "Sit," she commanded, pointing to their living room couch like she was directing traffic. "Don't argue, don't make excuses, just sit." I opened my mouth to protest. I really did have things to do, places to be, but something in her tone made me comply immediately. Maybe it was the exhaustion, or maybe it was just nice to have someone else make decisions for a few minutes. She disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a glass of orange juice and what looked like half a sandwich. "Eat," she said, settling into the armchair across from me. "Then we'll talk." So I told them everything. About Tessa, about the cancer, about my crazy work schedule, and how I was basically running on caffeine and stubbornness at this point. Camilla didn't interrupt with platitudes or empty reassurances like so many people do when they hear about someone's medical crisis. She just listened, occasionally nodding or asking a clarifying question, but mostly just letting me get it all out. Jerome sat quietly beside her, his hands folded in his lap, giving me the kind of patient attention that made me realize how long it had been since anyone had really listened to me. When I finished, Camilla didn't launch into advice or tell me everything would be okay. Instead, she just reached over and patted my shoulder with the gentle firmness of someone who'd comforted a lot of people in her life. "You need sleep," she said simply. "Real sleep, not whatever you've been calling sleep lately. Jerome, go get the spare bedroom ready." I started to protest again. I couldn't just crash at these people's house. I barely knew them. But she held up a hand that brooked no argument. "It's not up for discussion. You're going to sleep for at least 8 hours, and then we'll figure out how to help you manage this situation better." I slept for 12 hours straight, the kind of deep, dreamless sleep that I hadn't experienced in weeks. When I finally woke up, it was dark outside and I could smell something incredible coming from downstairs. Camilla had made pot roast with all the fixings, mashed potatoes, green beans, rolls that were still warm from the oven. It was the first real meal I'd had since this whole nightmare started, and I practically inhaled it while Jerome and Camilla made small talk about their day, the weather, anything except my problems. That's how it started, this gradual rebuilding of something I didn't even realize I'd lost. The next day, Camilla showed up at my front door with a container of homemade soup and a stern lecture about proper nutrition. "You can't take care of anyone else if you don't take care of yourself first," she said, bustling around my kitchen and making disgusted noises at the sorry state of my refrigerator. "This isn't sustainable, Marcus. You're going to burn out completely, and then where will Tessa be?" Word seemed to spread through the neighborhood faster than I expected. Mrs. Chun from next door, who I'd only ever exchanged polite nods with before, started bringing over casseroles and offering to help with grocery runs. The young couple from across the street, I think their names were Mike and Sarah, began including me in their evening dog walks, not saying much, but just providing company during those weird twilight hours when loneliness hits hardest. Jerome became my unofficial life coach, showing up at random times to drag me away from my computer screen for walks around the block. "Fresh air and perspective," he'd say, ignoring my protests about deadlines and client meetings. "The work will still be there when you get back, but you need to remember there's a world outside your office." During these walks, he'd tell me stories about his own life, how he'd met Camilla, their struggles with infertility, the way they'd learned to build a family out of friendships and community connections instead of blood relations. But it was Camilla who really became my anchor during those difficult weeks. She had this practical approach to crisis management that came from decades of dealing with medical emergencies and family traumas. She helped me reorganize my schedule so I wasn't killing myself trying to do everything at once. She taught me basic meal prep so I'd stop living off vending machine food and energy drinks. Most importantly, she helped me establish boundaries between work time, hospital time, and rest time. "Tessa needs you to be strong," she told me one evening while we were cleaning up my disaster of a home office, "but she doesn't need you to be a martyr." There's a difference between being supportive and being self-destructive. She showed me how to set up a simple system for managing our business tasks, prioritizing the essential stuff and letting some of the less critical projects slide for a while. Even as Tessa's condition continued to worsen, their presence became this cushion beneath my crumbling world. When I'd come home from particularly difficult hospital visits, drained and scared and trying not to show it, there would often be a light on in Jerome and Camilla's kitchen window. Sometimes they'd invite me over for tea and quiet conversation. Other times they'd just wave from their porch, letting me know they were there if I needed them. The whole neighborhood seemed to shift around us, becoming less of a collection of strangers who happened to live near each other and more of an actual community. People I'd barely spoken to before started checking in, offering help in small but meaningful ways. It wasn't charity or pity. It was just neighbors taking care of neighbors, the way things used to be before everyone got so busy and isolated. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was trying to make sense of our business expenses for tax season. Dr. Martinez's voice was gentle but direct, the kind of tone medical professionals use when they've delivered this type of news too many times before. "The latest scans show that Tessa's not responding to the current treatment protocol," she said, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "We think it would be beneficial for her to spend some time at home, with family, while we explore other options." Other options? That's doctor speak for "we're running out of things to try." And we all knew it. When I got to the hospital that afternoon, Tessa was sitting up in bed, already packing her few belongings into the small duffel bag we'd brought weeks earlier. She looked up when I walked in, and for a moment, she was just my Tessa again. Not the patient in room 417, not the cancer statistic, just the woman who used to steal my coffee and hum while she worked. "So," she said with forced cheerfulness, "looks like I'm getting a temporary parole from this place. Think you can handle having me back home for a while?" I tried to match her tone, tried to keep things light, but my throat felt tight. "I don't know," I managed. "You might mess up my perfectly organized chaos. I've gotten used to having the whole bed to myself." She laughed, and it sounded almost normal, almost like before. Bringing her home felt surreal. Everything in our house looked exactly the same. Her coffee mug still sitting in the dish rack, her reading glasses on the nightstand, her favorite throw blanket draped over the back of the couch. But everything was different too, charged with this desperate urgency to make every moment count. I found myself memorizing little things. The way she arranged the pillows on our bed, how she always checked her phone one last time before settling in to watch TV, the particular way she stirred cream into her coffee. We fell into a routine that was both familiar and heartbreaking. Tessa insisted on trying to work, claiming that sitting around feeling sorry for herself wasn't going to help anyone. She'd set up her laptop on the kitchen table and attempt to edit articles, though I could see her concentration wasn't what it used to be. Sometimes she'd stare at the screen for minutes without typing anything, her fingers hovering over the keyboard like she'd forgotten what she wanted to say. The cooking became our shared project. We'd always been decent in the kitchen, nothing fancy but competent enough to feed ourselves without relying on takeout every night. Now, though, preparing meals together took on this sacred quality. We'd spend an hour making simple pasta dishes or grilled cheese sandwiches, stretching out the process, savoring the normalcy of chopping vegetables, and arguing about whether the garlic was minced fine enough. "You know what I miss?" Tessa said one afternoon while we were making what had become our signature dish, a basic tomato sauce with whatever vegetables we had lying around. "I miss planning ahead, making grocery lists for the week, talking about what we wanted to try cooking next weekend. It's weird how much of life is just planning for later." She was stirring the sauce slowly, watching the steam rise from the pot. "Now everything feels so immediate, you know? Like I can't think past tomorrow." 3 days into her homestay, she surprised me with a request that caught me completely off guard. We were sitting on the couch, half watching some mindless sitcom, when she turned to me with this determined expression I recognized from her most stubborn moments. "I want to meet your neighbors," she said. "Camilla and Jerome. You've told me so much about how they've been helping you, and I feel like I should thank them." I hesitated. Tessa was having a good day, but good days were becoming rare and unpredictable. What if she got tired halfway through the visit? What if seeing her like this was too much for Camilla and Jerome? But Tessa had that look in her eyes that meant she'd already made up her mind, and arguing would be pointless. "They've been taking care of my husband while I couldn't," she said simply. "That makes them family in my book." So we walked the 2 blocks to their house, Tessa moving slowly but determinedly, her arm linked through mine for support. Jerome answered the door with his usual warm smile, but I saw his eyes widen slightly when he took in Tessa's appearance. She'd lost more weight than I'd realized, and the bright scarf she'd wrapped around her head couldn't quite disguise how much the treatments had changed her. But Camilla, bless her heart, stepped forward immediately and embraced Tessa like they were old friends reuniting after a long separation. "I've been wanting to meet you for weeks," she said, leading us into their living room. "Marcus talks about you constantly. I was starting to think he'd made you up." Tessa laughed, a real laugh this time, and settled into their couch like she belonged there. They talked for almost 2 hours about everything and nothing. Camilla shared stories from her nursing days. Jerome told embarrassing anecdotes about their early marriage, and Tessa regaled them with tales of our business adventures and my tendency to forget to eat when I was focused on work. It was the most animated I'd seen her in weeks, and for a while, it almost felt like a normal social visit between neighbors. As we were getting ready to leave, Tessa asked if she could speak with Camilla privately. They walked into the kitchen together, and though I couldn't hear their conversation, I saw Tessa take Camilla's hands in hers. When they came back, both women had tears in their eyes, but they were smiling too. "What was that about?" I asked as we walked home, the evening air cool against our faces. Tessa squeezed my arm. "Just girl talk," she said, but there was something in her voice that suggested it was more than that. "I like them, Marcus. I'm glad you found them. I'm glad they found you." A week later, Tessa passed away at home, her hands still in mine, just as the morning sun was beginning to filter through our bedroom windows. And suddenly, the world shifted under my feet in a way I wasn't sure I'd ever recover from. The silence after Tessa left was like nothing I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just quiet. It was this heavy, oppressive thing that filled every corner of our house and seemed to press down on my chest whenever I tried to breathe normally. I'd wake up in the morning, and for just a split second, I'd forget. I'd roll over expecting to see her there. maybe already awake and scrolling through her phone, ready to tell me about some article she'd read or some weird dream she'd had. But then reality would crash back down, and I'd remember that the other side of the bed would stay empty forever. The first few weeks were the worst. I couldn't bring myself to move any of her things. Her coffee mug still sat in the cabinet where she'd left it. Her laptop remained closed on the kitchen table. Her favorite sweater was still draped over the back of her desk chair. Sometimes I'd catch myself setting out 2 plates for dinner or buying her favorite yogurt at the grocery store out of pure habit. The muscle memory of our shared life was stronger than my conscious mind. There were days when I literally couldn't speak. Not because I was being dramatic or making some kind of statement, but because my voice just wouldn't work. I'd open my mouth to answer the phone or respond to a neighbor's greeting, and nothing would come out except maybe a croak or a whisper. It was like grief had rewired my vocal cords, turned off some essential part of the machinery that made communication possible. That's when Camilla taught me something that seemed weird at the time, but would turn out to be more important than I could have imagined. She showed up at my door one afternoon with a container of her famous chicken soup and found me sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my laptop screen without actually seeing anything on it. I tried to greet her, to thank her for coming by, but when I opened my mouth, nothing happened. "It's okay," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "You don't have to talk." She pulled out a piece of paper and drew a simple diagram, a hand with the thumb folded into the palm. "This is something I learned during my nursing days," she explained. "Sometimes people need help but can't ask for it. Maybe they're in too much pain, maybe they're scared, maybe they just can't find the words. This signal means, 'Help me,' without having to say anything." She made me practice it a few times, folding my thumb into my palm and wrapping my other fingers around it. "If you ever feel unsafe or overwhelmed or like you're drowning," she said, "you show me this signal. I'll know what it means, and I'll know you need help. No questions asked, no explanations required." At the time, I thought it was just Camilla being overly cautious, maybe treating me like one of her former patients. I couldn't imagine a scenario where I'd actually need to use it. But having that signal, knowing it was there, somehow made everything feel a little less impossible. It was like having a safety net that I hoped I'd never need, but was grateful to know existed. Camilla had this way of anticipating needs before people even knew they had them. She'd been doing it for decades, reading the subtle signs that someone was struggling and stepping in before they reached the breaking point. Slowly, gradually, I started to climb out of the deepest part of the grief pit. It wasn't linear. Some days I'd feel almost normal, productive even, and then something small would knock me sideways again. The smell of her shampoo lingering in our bathroom. A song on the radio that we used to sing together in the car. An email from a client asking how the team was doing, not knowing that the team was now just me. But I did start writing again. At first, it was just responding to emails, handling the basic administrative stuff that kept our business from completely falling apart. Then I began working on some of the article series that Tessa and I had started together, trying to maintain the voice and tone we'd developed as a team. It felt strange, finishing her sentences, completing thoughts she'd never get to express, but it also felt important. Like I was keeping a promise to her, to our work, to the clients who'd trusted us with their projects. The business actually started growing in ways we'd never expected. Word spread somehow, maybe through our existing clients, maybe through the articles I was publishing about navigating grief and loss, and I began getting requests from people who wanted help telling their own difficult stories. Entrepreneurs who'd failed and wanted to write about lessons learned. Families dealing with medical crises who needed someone to help them organize their thoughts and experiences. People going through divorces, job losses, major life transitions. I found myself becoming an unofficial mentor to younger freelancers who were just starting out in the digital content world. There was something therapeutic about helping other people solve problems, about using the skills Tessa and I had developed together to make other people's lives a little easier. It gave me purpose during a time when purpose felt hard to come by. 2 years passed. Not quickly. Grief has a way of making time move strangely, some days crawling by like they're underwater, others disappearing before you realize they've started. But gradually, the sharp edges of loss began to soften into something more manageable. I still miss Tessa every day, still talked to her sometimes when I was alone in the house, still kept her picture on my desk where I could see it while I worked. But the grief stopped feeling like it was going to suffocate me. I thought I'd figured out how to live with the loss. I thought the worst was behind me, that I'd learned how to navigate this new version of my life. I was wrong, of course, but I wouldn't find that out until a rainy Thursday evening when everything I thought I knew about moving forward got turned upside down. It was one of those miserable Thursday evenings in late October when the rain comes down sideways and makes you question why anyone ever thought living in a place with actual weather was a good idea. I'd spent the day working on a particularly challenging project, helping a small tech startup craft their brand story, and my brain felt like mush. The kind of tired that comes from staring at a computer screen for too many hours and drinking too much coffee to compensate for not enough sleep. I was locking up Peterson's Grocery after pulling a short shift to help them with their inventory system upgrade. Yeah, I was still doing occasional work there, not because I needed the money anymore, but because Pete and his family had been good to me during the worst times, and loyalty means something. Plus, there's something oddly therapeutic about organizing shelves and helping customers find what they're looking for. Simple problems with simple solutions, you know? The rain was really coming down hard, and I was fumbling with my car keys while trying to keep my laptop bag from getting soaked when I noticed someone approaching from across the parking lot. At first, I figured it was just another customer making a last-minute run for milk or bread or whatever emergency grocery item people suddenly realized they need at 8:30 on a Thursday night. But as the figure got closer, I could see this wasn't your typical grocery store customer. The guy was tall, probably 6'2" or 6'3", wearing an expensive-looking navy suit that somehow still looked crisp despite the rain. He had one of those black umbrellas that actually keeps you dry, the kind that costs more than my monthly coffee budget. And he was walking with the kind of purpose that suggested he knew exactly where he was going and who he was looking for. "Excuse me," he called out when he was still about 10 feet away, his voice carrying that particular blend of authority and politeness that screams, "I'm a professional, and I'm here on business. Are you Marcus Bell?" I stopped wrestling with my keys and looked up, water dripping from my hair into my eyes. "Yeah, that's me. Can I help you with something?" I was already running through possibilities in my head. Maybe a potential client who'd track me down, though that seemed unlikely given the time and location. Maybe someone from the grocery store's corporate office, though Pete had never mentioned anything about outside consultants. The man stepped closer, staying carefully under his umbrella, and reached into his jacket pocket. For a split second, some paranoid part of my brain wondered if I was about to get mugged by the world's most well-dressed criminal. But he pulled out a business card and what looked like legal documents in a plastic folder. "My name is Miles Harper," he said, extending the business card toward me. "I'm an attorney representing your wife, Tessa Bell, in a civil matter." He spoke with the kind of measured precision that lawyers practice in front of mirrors, every word carefully chosen and delivered. "We're filing a lawsuit against you for $7 million in damages related to emotional distress and financial betrayal. You've been served." I stared at him for a long moment, rain still running down my face, trying to process what he'd just said. Then I started laughing. Not a polite chuckle or a nervous giggle, but full-on, bend-over-at-the-waist laughing. The kind of laughter that comes when something is so completely absurd that your brain can't compute it any other way. "I'm sorry," I said, straightening up and wiping my eyes, though I couldn't tell if the moisture was from rain or laughter-induced tears. "Did you just say you're representing my wife in a lawsuit against me? Because if so, that's either the worst joke I've ever heard or you've got the wrong Marcus Bell." Miles Harper's expression didn't change. He stood there in his perfect suit under his perfect umbrella, looking at me like I was the crazy one. "I don't joke about legal matters, Mr. Bell. Your wife contacted our firm 3 weeks ago with compelling evidence of financial misconduct and emotional manipulation. The damages she's seeking are substantial but justified given the severity of—" "Hold up," I interrupted, holding up my hand. "Just stop right there." The laughter was gone now, replaced by something colder and more serious. "My wife died 2 years ago. Tessa Bell passed away from cancer on March 15th, 2023. So either you're running some kind of sick scam, or someone has given you seriously bad information." The color drained from Miles Harper's face so fast I thought he might pass out right there in the parking lot. His mouth opened and closed a couple of times without any sound coming out, like a fish that had suddenly found itself on dry land. The legal documents in his hand started to shake slightly, and for the first time since he'd approached me, he looked less like a confident attorney and more like a guy who was realizing he'd made a very serious mistake. "What?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of rain hitting the pavement. She can't be dead. That's impossible. We have documentation, photographs, witness statements. We have a photo of her from just last month." Now it was my turn to stare. "What kind of photo?" With trembling hands, Miles pulled out his phone and scrolled through what looked like a folder of case files. He found what he was looking for and turned the screen toward me. "This photo," he said, his voice gaining a little strength. "This was taken outside a restaurant in downtown Portland on September 23rd. That's your wife, isn't it?" I looked at the image on his phone screen. It was blurry, clearly taken from a distance, but it showed a woman with auburn hair walking alongside a man I didn't recognize. The woman was wearing a green jacket and had her hair pulled back in a ponytail. For just a second, my heart stopped, because there was definitely a resemblance. Similar height, similar build, similar hair color. But it wasn't Tessa. "No," I said firmly, handing his phone back to him. "That's not my wife. I don't know who that woman is, but it's definitely not Tessa." I looked him straight in the eyes. "Who hired you? Who told you this story? Because someone has seriously played you, Mr. Harper." Miles was shaking his head, looking down at his phone and then back at me. "This doesn't make sense. I have documentation, contracts, retainer fees. The person who contacted us had intimate knowledge of your business, your marriage, specific details that only someone close to you would know." "Yeah, well, whoever it was, they lied to you," I said, pulling my car keys back out of my pocket. "And now I want to know who they are and why they're trying to drag my dead wife into some kind of legal scam." The rain was still coming down, and both of us were getting soaked despite his umbrella, but neither of us seemed to care anymore. Miles Harper, attorney at law, looked like his entire world had just shifted on its axis. And honestly, mine felt pretty shaky too. The ride back to my house was awkward as hell. Miles Harper sat in my passenger seat, his expensive suit dripping rainwater onto my car's fabric interior, clutching that plastic folder of fake documents like it might somehow transform into something real if he held it tight enough. Neither of us spoke during the 10-minute drive, but I could feel the tension radiating off him in waves. The guy had gone from confident attorney to confused victim in the span of about 5 minutes, and he was clearly struggling to process what that meant for his career, his reputation, his entire understanding of the situation. I kept glancing at him while I drove, trying to figure out if this was all some elaborate con job, or if Miles really was just another mark in whatever scheme someone was running. The rain on my windshield made everything look distorted and surreal, which seemed appropriate given how completely insane this whole evening had become. 2 hours ago, my biggest concern had been whether I'd remembered to save my latest project file before leaving the office. Now I was apparently the target of a multi-million-dollar lawsuit filed by my dead wife. When we pulled into my driveway, I noticed Camilla's kitchen light was on across the street, and for a split second, I considered just driving over there instead. Let Camilla and Jerome deal with this craziness while I hid in their guest bedroom and pretended none of this was happening. But that would have been the coward's way out, and besides, I needed to see exactly what kind of evidence this guy thought he had. "Look," I said as we sat in my car, engine still running, "I'm going to show you some things that will prove my wife is dead. And then you're going to tell me everything you know about whoever hired you. Because this whole situation is seriously messed up." Miles nodded, looking like he was bracing himself for bad news. "I have to admit, Mr. Bell, this isn't how I expected this evening to go. I've been practicing law for 15 years, and I've never had a case file that was this wrong about basic facts." Inside my house, I led him straight to the living room, where Tessa's memorial altar still sat on the side table by the window. I'd kept it simple but meaningful. Her favorite photograph surrounded by white lilies that I replaced every week, a small collection of her jewelry, and the last article she'd written before getting too sick to work. The photo showed her laughing at something just outside the camera's view, her eyes bright and full of life. It was taken about 6 months before her diagnosis, back when we still thought we had all the time in the world. Miles stared at the memorial setup for a long moment, and I watched his face go through several different emotions. Confusion, recognition, and then something that looked like dawning horror. "Oh, God," he whispered, sinking into my couch without being invited. This is really real, isn't it? She's actually gone. Yeah, she's gone, I said, settling into the chair across from him. March 15th, 2023. I can show you the death certificate if you need official documentation, but I think that memorial altar makes the point pretty clearly. I leaned forward, trying to read his expression. Now, who hired you? Who gave you that photo and convinced you that my dead wife wanted to sue me? Miles ran his hands through his damp hair, leaving it sticking up at odd angles. This is going to sound crazy, but I don't actually know his real name. He contacted our firm through an intermediary, said he was representing Mrs. Bell and needed legal counsel for a complex marital dispute. He paid our retainer fee in cash, which should have been a red flag, but the amount was substantial and the story seemed legitimate. What story? I asked. What did this guy tell you I supposedly did? According to him, you'd been siphoning money from your joint business accounts, hiding assets, and planning to divorce your wife while leaving her with nothing. He claimed to have bank records, email communications, even audio recordings of you discussing the plan with business associates. Miles pulled out his phone and scrolled through his notes. He said Mrs. Bell had hired a private investigator who documented everything, and she wanted to file for both divorce and civil damages before you could complete whatever financial scheme you were running. I shook my head in disbelief. And you didn't think to verify any of this? Like, maybe call my wife directly or check public records to see if she was actually alive. Miles's face turned red. The intermediary said she was in hiding, afraid of what you might do if you discovered she was building a case against you. And honestly, Mr. Bell, we get a lot of high-conflict divorce cases where one spouse is genuinely afraid of the other. It's not unusual for people to work through third parties in those situations. So this mysterious source provided fake bank records, fake emails, fake everything? Apparently so. And he was good at it. The documentation looked professional. The financial records had all the right formatting and account numbers. If these are forgeries, they're extremely sophisticated ones. Miles set his phone down and looked at me directly. I need to ask you something, and please don't take this the wrong way, but is there anyone in your life who might have a grudge against you? An ex-business partner, a disgruntled client, someone who might want to cause you serious legal trouble? Before I could answer, flashing red and blue lights suddenly illuminated my living room windows. Car doors slammed outside, and within seconds, someone was pounding on my front door with the kind of authority that meant business. Police. Open up. Miles went white as a sheet. Did you call the cops? No, I said, but then I remembered something. As we'd walked from the car to my house, I'd caught a glimpse of Camilla in her front yard, and without really thinking about it, I'd raised my hand with my thumb tucked into my palm. The signal she'd taught me 2 years ago. The one that meant, help me, without having to say a word. The pounding on the door continued. Marcus Bell, this is the police. We need to speak with you. Miles was starting to panic, looking around my living room like he was planning an escape route. Mr. Bell, I swear I had no idea this was all fake. I'm not part of whatever scam this is. I'm just a lawyer who got played by a very convincing con artist. Relax, I said, walking toward the front door. I believe you. But we're both about to have a very interesting conversation with some cops, and you better hope you can explain your part in this mess. I paused with my hand on the doorknob, because something tells me this story is about to get a lot more complicated. The officers who burst through my front door weren't messing around. 2 uniformed cops and what looked like a detective in a rumpled suit, all of them scanning my living room like they expected to find bodies or drug labs, or whatever else warranted this kind of dramatic entrance. Miles practically jumped out of his skin, throwing his hands up in the air like he was surrendering to an invading army. Whoa, he stammered, his voice cracking. I'm an attorney. I'm just here on legal business. The poor guy looked like he was about to pass out, which honestly wasn't helping his case for looking innocent in all this. Sir, we need you to stay calm and keep your hands visible, the detective said, his tone professional but firm. He was a middle-aged black man with graying temples and the kind of steady presence that suggested he'd seen pretty much everything during his career. We received a call about a possible disturbance or threat situation at this address. There's no threat, I said quickly, trying to defuse the situation before it got completely out of hand. My neighbor saw me use a distress signal because this whole situation is, well, it's complicated, but nobody's in danger here. The detective's eyes moved between Miles and me, taking in the scattered legal documents on my coffee table and Miles's obvious state of panic. "I'm Detective Rodriguez. Can you explain what's going on here, Mr. Bell?" So I gave him the short version: the lawsuit claim, the dead wife, the fake evidence, the mysterious con artist who'd apparently orchestrated the whole thing. Rodriguez listened without interrupting, occasionally glancing at Miles, who was nodding along like a bobblehead, confirming every detail. "This man," Rodriguez said, pointing at Miles, "he claims he was hired to serve you legal papers based on false information?" "That's exactly right," Miles said, pulling out his business card with shaking hands. "I had no idea Mrs. Bell was deceased. The documentation I received was extremely convincing: bank records, photographs, witness statements. If this is a fraud, then I'm a victim too." Rodriguez examined Miles's business card and ID, then looked at the memorial altar with Tessa's photo. His expression softened slightly when he saw the dates on the small plaque beneath her picture. "Mr. Harper, you're saying someone paid you to file a fraudulent lawsuit?" "I think so, yes. The retainer was paid in cash by an intermediary who claimed to represent Mrs. Bell. The whole thing was set up to look legitimate, but obviously." Miles gestured helplessly at the memorial. "We're going to need you both to come down to the station to file formal reports," Rodriguez said. "Mr. Harper, if what you're saying is true, then you've been used as part of a larger fraud scheme. Mr. Bell, someone went to considerable trouble to target you specifically. This isn't random." As they prepared to escort us out, Rodriguez turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Mr. Bell, have you had any other unusual incidents lately? Strange phone calls, people asking questions about your business or personal life, anything that seemed off?" I shook my head. "Nothing. My life's been pretty quiet since Tessa died. Just work, neighbors, the usual routine." "Well, it's not quiet anymore," Rodriguez said grimly. "Someone put a lot of effort into this scheme, which means they're either very committed to causing you trouble, or there's something bigger going on here that we haven't figured out yet." As we walked out to the police cars, I caught sight of Camilla standing on her porch, worry written all over her face. I gave her a small wave and what I hoped was a reassuring smile, though honestly, I wasn't feeling very reassured myself. Miles was still muttering apologies and explanations to anyone who would listen, but my mind was already racing ahead to bigger questions. Who would go to this much trouble to mess with my life? And more importantly, what did they really want? The investigation that followed moved faster than I expected. Miles, true to his word, cooperated completely with the police. He handed over every document, every communication, every piece of evidence that had been provided to him by the mysterious intermediary. Within 48 hours, Detective Rodriguez had traced the fake documents back to their source: a guy named Vincent Crawford who'd been running sophisticated fraud schemes across 3 states. Crawford was one of those career criminals who specialized in elaborate long cons. He'd identify targets, usually people who'd recently lost spouses or gone through major life changes, and create fake legal situations designed to extract money through settlements or legal fees. In my case, he'd apparently spent months researching Tessa and me, gathering enough personal information to create convincing fake evidence. The plan was probably to let the lawsuit play out for a while, then approach me with an offer to settle out of court for a substantial but manageable amount. What Crawford hadn't counted on was running into a lawyer who was honest enough to admit when he'd been scammed, and a target who had neighbors looking out for him. Miles didn't face any criminal charges, but he did get a serious wake-up call about due diligence. "I've completely changed how our firm handles new clients," he told me when he called a few weeks later. "No more accepting cases without independent verification of basic facts. This whole experience has been humbling, to say the least." I didn't press charges against Miles personally. The guy had been played just as much as I had, and he'd stepped up when it mattered. But I did ask him for one thing: stop chasing easy money cases. I said during our last conversation, "Some stories are too good to be true, and some people really are gone. Let them rest." The real victory came when Crawford's entire operation got shut down. Rodriguez told me they'd found evidence of dozens of similar schemes targeting grieving families across the country. My case had been the thread that unraveled the whole thing. About a month after everything settled down, I showed up at Jerome and Camilla's door with a bottle of wine and the biggest hug I could manage. Camilla scolded me like the mother hen she'd always been. You should have called me directly, she said, swatting my arm. I gave you that signal for a reason, not so you could wave at me from across the street during a crisis. I did use it, I pointed out, grinning. And you came through exactly like you promised. Her expression softened. Well, then I'm glad I taught it to you. These days, I still light a candle for Tessa every morning. I still whisper, I miss you, to her photo while I drink my coffee. But the grief has transformed into something gentler, more like a warm memory than a sharp pain. I've learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means finding ways to carry love forward instead of letting loss drag you backward. I'm writing again, really writing. Not just client work, but real stories about resilience and community and the unexpected ways people show up for each other when things get dark. Turns out, surviving grief and surviving a con artist both taught me the same lesson. You're never as alone as you think you are, and sometimes the people who save you are the ones you least expect. The business is thriving in ways Tessa and I never imagined. I've hired 2 freelancers, and we're expanding into podcasting. But the best part is that I wake up each day knowing that even in a world without her voice, I've found others that help me carry on. And sometimes, that's enough to build a whole new life on.